Suella Braverman sacked. David Cameron is back. Rishi Sunak rolls the dice with a dramatic cabinet reshuffle. This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative peer Ed Vaizey from the Shadow Cabinet, Labour's Jonathan Ashworth, and two political editors, The Spectator's Katie Balls and The New Statesman's Andrew Marr. Today.
I'm a bit tired, but I don't think I've had a funny turn. But let me just tell you what's just happened. David Cameron has just walked up the street and gone into 10 Downing Street.
He left Downing Street 7 years ago. David Cameron is back as Foreign Secretary. His appointment came just minutes after Suella Braverman was sacked as Home Secretary and replaced by outgoing Foreign Secretary James Cleverly.
I have had a very good conversation with the Prime Minister, who's made it very clear that he wants us to deliver on our promises, to stop the boats, to protect the British people.
We'll bring you the latest from Downing Street and the best analysis as the reshuffle unfolds. Well, what a day it's been so far. It started with this tweet from the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason, breaking: Suella Braverman sacked. So, the Home Secretary out. And then this happened. The former Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron, arrives in Downing Street. The question on everyone's lips was, what was he doing there at this particular point? Fevered speculation about him perhaps coming back into government, although not an MP or even in the House of Lords. And then we heard this confirmation, first of all, that the former Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, was replacing, as you can see here from Downing Street, was replacing Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. And then this. David Cameron to replace James Cleverly as Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs. Well, in all the years I've been covering the Westminster beat, this is the most breathtaking return to frontline politics I've ever seen. But the opening question for the panel, starting with you, Ed Vaizey, is which is the most consequential decision politically, Suella Braverman's sacking or the appointment of the former Prime Minister, David Cameron?
Oh, that's a very good question. I suspect I don't know is the answer. I think the Suella Braverman thing is interesting and it'll play out in the next week. She said in her departure tweet, I think it was, that she had more to say later. So is she going to become the darling of the Tory right? Noise is off. Is she even going to potentially even start launching a leadership bid even before the election? So that will be massive. And it's added to by the appointment of David Cameron, because the appointment of David Cameron is a big signal by the Prime Minister that he wants to return to the centre ground that he dismissed in his conference speech last month, when he claimed that the Camerons and the Osbornes of this world were very much the past. But it's a delight. You'll see the tweets from centrist MPs like Simon Hoare and Damien Green and others. They are all delighted. They think the Tory party is returning to sanity. So I think what it does mean is they're both consequential in the sense I do think it means there's now going to be a kind of showdown between the right around Suella Braverman and the mainstream Conservative Party. I think, and I obviously hope as well, the mainstream Conservative Party will win. I think they have the numbers. I think the right is overblown and a spent force.
A surprise? Did you get any idea?
Totally and utterly gobsmacked.
What about you? Most consequential decision politically, Jonathan?
Well, I mean, look at it. The Conservatives have been in government now for, 13, going on 14 years. People are paying more in tax. Working people are paying more on their mortgage. They're waiting longer for NHS treatment. The country needs change. I mean, this isn't change, bringing back David Cameron. And actually what it is more of the Tory psychodrama, more of Tory division. It's not going to fix the fundamental problems facing the country. It's not going to fix the cost of living crisis. It's not going to fix the NHS. And I think people watching the news tonight are just going to think, what, bringing back David Cameron, a failed Tory Prime Minister? They're going to look at the Tories. We're going to have more Tory infighting, more Tory chaos, more Tory division. This is not going to fix the deep-rooted problems that the Conservatives have brought about over 13 years.
Do you welcome the sacking of Suella Braverman?
Look, Suella Braverman should not have been appointed in the first place. She wasn't up to the job, and she was appointed because of Rishi Sunak's weakness. And if you think about Rishi Sunak's judgment, he's had to sack Braverman. He shouldn't have appointed her in the first place. He had to get rid of Gavin Williamson, Dominic Raab, Nadeem Zawari. These are people he appointed in the last 12, 13 months. The fact that he's lost so many cabinet ministers in 13 months, I think says something damning about the quality of his judgment.
Which will prove, do you think, to be the most consequential decision?
So I'm not trying to cheat the question, but I think that...
But thanks for that disclaimer.
Effectively, the David Cameron appointment means that the Suella Braverman decision will be seen differently. If it was simply moving Suella Braverman and acting as Home Secretary, I think some on the right would actually tolerate that because they think that her behaviour over the past week put Rishi Sunak in a place where his authority was being challenged. But you combine that with the David Cameron appointment, and now those MPs on the right are starting to see red because they effectively think this does, to Ed's point, suggest that the party is pivoting in a direction away from the 2019 Red Wall message and towards probably the 2015 electoral pitch, more blue wall. And that will make some anxious about what that means for their own seats, but also about what they believe in. And I think that is why the David Cameron point probably is the more impactful, but taken with the Suella Braverman.
Well, it was certainly distracting when Suella Braverman would have been, obviously, the story, her sacking. But what do you make of which decision do you think will prove to be more important?
Suella Braverman sacking. You said rolling the dice, and I think this is a massive, massive gamble by Rishi Sunak this morning. And I think, in a way, in the last few weeks and months, we've all been struggling to ask ourselves, who really is Rishi Sunak? Where is the centre of his politics? And this shows us what the answer is. This shows us the answer is he's prepared to take on the right. He's going to have a real trouble now with Reform UK. He's prepared to lose seats if necessary in that direction in order to hold more of the so-called blue wall seats. And it's very, very important to remember or acknowledge that the right is meeting this afternoon in Parliament to discuss their reaction to that. And part of the agenda is whether there should be, wait for it, big breath, a Suella Braverman leadership campaign. Right.
Well, we'll all be holding our breaths, of course, for the rest of the day. Let's talk to the BBC's chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, who is still in Downing Street. We saw you there in the headlines with incredulity, in fact. Have you recovered from the shock of seeing David Cameron?
Just about. I mean, it's been a very weird day, Joe, I have to be honest, and we've only had 2 big appointments so far. I think it is hard to overstate quite what a remarkable return it is for David Cameron. Just the sheer fact of having a former Prime Minister back in the Cabinet for the first time in 60-odd years. But I think also, as you've just been discussing there, the political implications here in Westminster of bringing back David Cameron, the man who modernised the Conservative Party, the man who brought it back to the centre ground, his allies would say. Appointing him at any time would have been politically controversial. Appointing him just half an hour, I slightly lost track, after sacking Suella Braverman, now that really is quite something.
Right, what is number 10 saying, or why do we think Rishi Sunak has sacked Suella Braverman today?
I think it was all about Rishi Sunak's authority. Certainly the subject of her article in The Times back last Thursday was incendiary, and there were Conservative MPs frustrated by her rhetoric. There were some Conservative MPs who also thought she was undermining the operational independence of the police. But actually, the nub of her argument that the police have been a bit soft, basically, she argued, on the pro-Palestinian protests, I think that's fairly widely shared, certainly shared in Downing Street. We were hearing this morning about how Rishi Sunak is looking at ways to toughen the laws around these kinds of protests. I think it was all about her decision to defy his authority, not to make the edits to that article that Downing Street had asked for. And I think that was the final straw. But also, so many government ministers had just got fed up with doing interviews with people like you and being asked, do you agree with the latest thing that Suella Braverman has said today? She had become effectively a distraction, and I think Rishi Sunak just thought it was enough.
How much of a problem is she going to be on the backbenches?
It's hard to know. I think actually Wednesday is a very significant day to help guide us because on Wednesday the Supreme Court, just a little bit over there, will announce their verdict on the legality or otherwise of the government's flagship small boats policy, which is to process asylum applications in Rwanda, and then if people's applications are successful, for them to live their lives there in Rwanda rather than here in the UK. I think either way, whatever way the Supreme Court rules, that's going to be a very politically significant decision. But we will also now have the spectacle of seeing Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, as she now is, responding to that decision. And she may well respond to that decision differently to Rishi Sunak. She may urge the government to go further than it intends to on combating small boats, on its approach to immigration and asylum. And that will be interesting, but also how many MPs she brings with her. How many MPs make a point of agreeing with Suella Braverman as she begins to make public pronouncements from the backbenchers. I think that will give us the best guide to what she's going to be like as a backbencher and how big a threat to Rishi Sunak's leadership that may prove.
I mean, the appointment of James Cleverly as the new Home Secretary, presumably to be far more aligned on that issue that you've been talking about, and others with Rishi Sunak, or not?
Well, I think crucially, James Cleverly won't place articles in newspapers that haven't been approved by 10 Downing Street. I think that was probably the first test. James Cleverly, by the way, not previously an ally of Rishi Sunak at all. He backed Boris Johnson very firmly, then backed Liz Truss. He was a key figure in Liz Truss's leadership campaign. She was the one who made him Foreign Secretary, and I think a lot of people, probably James Cleverly included, were a bit surprised that Rishi Sunak kept him on. But the view at the top of the Conservative Party is that he's proved himself both loyal to Rishi Sunak, but also emollient on the world stage, diplomatic. And perhaps they now want James Cleverly to apply some of that diplomacy domestically, because relations between the Metropolitan Police and the government are clearly quite frayed. So they will be hoping that a new person can help improve that. But also, I think it's kind of clear James Cleverly was moved to make way for David Cameron, or Lord Cameron, as we're perhaps now meant to call him. I'm not sure.
Well, that will happen fairly soon, I should think. Are we expecting anything more reshuffle-wise, dramatic, that is?
Well, I don't think we're going to. I don't think Theresa May's about to win Downing Street, the famous last words. But I do think we are going to get a big, wide-ranging batch of new appointments. I think this is now Rishi Sunak's pre-election reshuffle. It's the reshuffle that Conservative MPs have been urging him to do practically since he became Prime Minister. Because as James Cleverly signifies, as I was just saying there, a lot of his cabinet, at least as of this morning, were people appointed by Liz Truss. Because when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, he wanted to heal the divisions of the Conservative Party. I think to a degree he's done that. To another degree, he's learned that's kind of impossible with some Conservative MPs. So now we're going to get him going his own way. I think in contrast to David Cameron, a figure literally from the political past, will be getting people who Rishi Sunak wants to be part of the political future. MPs who were elected in 2019 will be given much more prominent jobs, I expect, probably starting in the next few minutes or so.
Henry Zeffman, thank you very much. We may return to you in Downing Street throughout the programme if those appointments are announced in our time. Let me just show you this tweet. Andrea Jenkins, on the right of the party, Conservative MP. I support Suella Braverman, sacked for speaking the truth. Bad call by Rishi, caving in to the left. How much trouble does that spell?
Well, there's an awful lot of people out there who agree with that. I was listening to my colleague, forgive me, LBC's Nick Ferrari this morning, and a slew of calls coming in from people who are furious, say this is the victory of the woke brigade, this is not speaking for Britain. And there are a lot of people out there who think that way and who now will be voting for Reform UK or someone like that rather than Conservative. It is a choice that the Prime Minister has now made. He wants to nudge his personality, as it were, towards the centre-right rather than the right-right. And, you know, there's pros and cons in all of these kinds of decisions. So I think this is highly consequential for him. And the David Cameron appointment is not without risk either. There are a lot of people, particularly on the right of the party, who think he's too close to China. And there is a little bit of a thing out there already about the fact that this is an unelected Prime Minister who put Suella Braverman into the Home Office because he needed to become Prime Minister in the first case. And inside the Beltway Westminster deal, appointing an unelected Foreign Secretary. And I think out there that is beginning to resonate a bit.
Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I think with these things, you always got to think about the numbers. So in terms of the parliamentary problem, we know that the New Conservatives plan to meet this afternoon. I think the quite clear implication is several of them are not happy. And it is that combination of losing Suella Braverman, which I think you could have defended on authority to Rishi Sunak grounds, combined with David Cameron. We still have a lot of the reshuffle left to go. But I think the gamble Rishi Sunak has taken is whether he is now going to face a revolt on the right, which is going to give Labour attack lines it doesn't even need to think about by pointing out at these rows erupting in the chamber, and what will Lee Anderson, the deputy Tory chairman, now do, and how will they speak, and it drags on. And if that is the case, then I think the reshuffle suddenly becomes quite messy. If they can quell that rebellion, it's just a handful and they look quite insignificant. Rishi Sunak asserts his authority.
Who are the New Conservatives?
So I think you look at people like Miriam Cates, for example, I think who actually is a rival to Suella Braverman. While they get on very well, I think a rival for that champion of, who is the darling of the right, amassing lots of compliments. You have Danny Kruger in that group who uniquely does not actually have a red wall seat, but talks about the 2019 coalition. And the group of 2019 MPs are a real headache, to be honest, to the government. But what we're testing out now is this idea of those around Rishi Sunak, which is they think Suella Braverman's influence on the right is overplayed by the media. She does not have the hold, and they think this group is fairly small. Now, we've got a few days to find out if that is the case.
Right. The showdown that you talked about, I mean, it sounds like it is about to begin. It's not going to be very easy, is it, for Rishi Sunak? David Cameron maybe actually be a negative rather than a positive for the party politics.
Yeah, I think Katie's absolutely right. I mean, it's too early to say how strong, as it were, the right, as Andrew called them, is in the party and how active they are going to be and what their kind of comeback on the Suella Braverman sacking is going to be. Is it going to just be noises off and grumblings? And there'll be certain newspapers, I have to say, as well, that will be part of this debate. Maybe even some broadcast channels as well may also be part of this debate. So we'll see.
We don't have to mention.
We'll see how this plays out, and I don't think we'll know quite until sort of the next week or so. I would have to say again that it depends which tribe you're part of, because of course I'm getting lots of texts from people saying, thank goodness David Cameron is back. I wasn't going to vote at all. I couldn't face voting Conservative. I might even have voted Labour. Now there's something to support. This is a great signal to them. And so, in a sense, it is a kind of cost-benefit analysis. It is damaging, I think, if you're looking to hold on to all the red wall seats. But it is probably very good news if you want to shore up your vote in the south. And things are so fragile at the moment. That is a thing for the Conservatives.
Well, that may be more of a challenge and more difficult for Labour, a more centrist feel to the Conservative Party, rightly or wrongly, some more stability perhaps with David Cameron, a former Prime Minister, coming back in. That will be a challenge to Labour.
But I think the debate on this panel exposes something very fundamental, which is the divisions in the Tory party. This whole debate is conducted in what does it mean for the right, what does it mean for the left of the Tory party, and that just reveals how divided this Tory government is.
But it has implications for Labour too, obviously, in terms of the direction it goes.
Cannot fix the fundamental issues facing the country, that people are paying more in tax, people are paying more on their mortgage, that the NHS is in crisis. And the most significant appointment, by the way, in any cabinet reshuffle is the appointment of Chancellor. And today, a few weeks ago, there was all this speculation they were going to get rid of Jeremy Hunt. They have kept Jeremy Hunt in place. That suggests to me that the current economic policy of high tax, low growth is going to continue under Rishi Sunak.
Ed?
Well, it's good that Jeremy... I mean, it's a great year of revivals to have Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor and staying put. I mean, I think he is a good appointment, and I think he kind of signals stability and caution and getting the public finances back on track. I don't think it's, he's gratuitously raising taxes, and I think he's right to resist the kind of siren calls from the right to have these kind of gratuitous taxes to take us back to an era of Margaret Thatcher, which they don't understand, because she didn't, of course, really cut taxes until the late 80s. So I don't see a problem with that. We'll see who the other people are who are appointing the reshuffle. Look, I can't argue with John. I can't argue that the Tory party is divided. And it is a credit to Keir Starmer, because 3 or 4 years ago, we would have been happily having a nice old bun fight about how appallingly split the Labour Party was under Jeremy Corbyn. It's a credit to Keir Starmer that in 3-4 years he's gotten to a position where they're in the chance of winning an election. It goes without saying, every Tory, every sensible Tory tears their hair out. Why can't they just get behind each other, focus on the prize of winning an election. It's 13 years of Tory government and people are being very self-indulgent.
Well, let's get some more reaction. We can talk to Matthew Goodwin, author and academic. Hello to you, Matthew. What do you make of Suella Braverman's sacking?
Well, I think it tells us how lost the Conservatives really are. Whatever you think about Suella Braverman, the fact is she spoke for a majority of people in the country when it came to issues like lowering migration, reforming multiculturalism, strengthening our national borders. And of course, she called out institutions like the police for ideological bias. And I know from my own polling that many voters feel that way. What I think, Joe, as well, is that the replacement of Braverman by David Cameron symbolises a party that would rather return to the pre-Brexit broken consensus in British politics than actually reinvent itself to meet the post-Brexit realignment that it won in 2019. That's what's so significant here.
All right, well, get your reaction to that, Ed Vaizey.
Well, I was going to give a glib response saying I rather enjoyed the pre-Brexit consensus, but I certainly do think Britain was on a roll. But I accept kind of Matthew's critique and challenge, which is Boris Johnson did win a lot of seats in the north of England that we had never won before. The levelling up agenda was serious, and putting the concerns of those voters on the Tory agenda is an important element. So I think it's an acceptable challenge, but I don't think, Suella Braverman was sacked for the reason, it's a victory for woke. It's a victory for the Prime Minister's authority and not having a Home Secretary that calls out her own police force.
Well, Matthew, and then I'll come to you, Andrew. Matthew?
I didn't say this was a victory for the woke. What this is a victory for is the elite consensus in this country, which is basically taking down politicians and figures who challenge the consensus around large-scale migration, a broken political economy, a broken model of multiculturalism. I mean, Joe, there are going to be lots of voters out there today looking at this, looking at every figure who's challenged this consensus. Boris, gone. Liz Truss, gone. Suella Braverman, gone. A Prime Minister who, to be frank, doesn't have much of a democratic mandate out there in the country. And what I'm worried about, Joe, is we no longer seem capable of even entertaining a radical alternative to the status quo.
But it's a slightly odd argument. First of all, it's a bit Nadine Dorries to say that, Liz Truss was taken out by the elite establishment. She was taken out because she took out the economy, and so the Tory party panicked and got rid of her. It's also slightly odd to say that Suella's been taken out by the elite consensus when it is one of the Prime Minister's flagship policies. One of his 5 flagship policies is to stop the boats. He's made it very clear. You can agree with it or disagree with it. The idea that the Prime Minister is out of lockstep with Suella Braverman on that policy doesn't seem to be the case.
Andrew?
Suella's consistently...
Sorry, Matt, I was just going to let Andrew Marr come in.
Very briefly. I'm not sure that Matt's right about how popular Suella Braverman really is up and down the country. She's certainly popular when she talks in some of her remarks about migration, that's for sure. But when she starts to talk about taking away the tents from homeless people, when she starts to attack the police, who, by the way, I think were by and large proved right this weekend on the streets of London, I think that's where she loses a lot of people, including long-term Conservative voters.
Right. Matthew?
No, I don't think that's right at all. I've polled voters and I've written extensively on it. When Suella Braverman said things like she thinks migration is an existential challenge to the country, 66% of voters agreed with her. When she said that she wanted stronger borders, large majorities, over 70%, agree with her. What we're seeing, basically, look, it's whatever you think about how Suella Braverman did her job, whatever you think about whether she was fit for office or whatever, what actually worries me about Britain now is we are incapable of actually entertaining a serious critique and alternative to a liberal elite consensus on these issues. And that is reflected not just in Suella Braverman, but in her replacement by David Cameron. It is ridiculous to think that the answer to the Conservative Party's problems is returning to liberal Cameroon politics. I mean, this is a party that is philosophically and ideologically completely lost.
But why is it ridiculous to think that?
It's ridiculous for lots of reasons.
What is your problem? What is your problem? Is it? I mean, I don't see. Do you want to end all? Do you want to end all?
Hang on, Matthew. Let Ed put the question.
You want to end all immigration? What is your particular issue that is broken about Britain that is so appalling to you?
Well, first of all, I don't want to end all immigration. What do I think is broken with Britain? Lots of things. under the Conservative Party, we're running net migration at 600,000 plus. We're importing cheap migrant workers to support a political economy.
Yeah, Suella Braverman has been the Home Secretary, hasn't
Boris
she?
Johnson was the Prime Minister for 3 years when all that was happening. So
Listen, I think the Conservative Party, I think the last
consensus?
13 years have been a disaster. I mean,
it is this kind of weird thing where you put the people who win the referendum in charge, you put Boris in charge, and when things don't get right, this kind of shadowy Liberal consensus is blamed for it. I mean, it's totally bizarre and inchoate argument. And then you get these.
Well, I can actually.
You get these people who claim to be patriots attacking the police and the Cenotaph. 9 police were injured at the Cenotaph by people who claim to be standing up for Britain and hitting policemen so they can get to the Cenotaph to protect the Cenotaph.
Hang on, Matthew.
I couldn't agree more. You know, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, elite consensus, really. Boris Johnson, elite consensus. Liz Truss, elite consensus. James Cleverly, Rishi Sunak, elite Liberal consensus. I think not.
Katie?
Well, I think the problem potentially for Rishi Sunak here is that if you think about that 2019 pitch, it feels as though he has moved away from that with some of the appointments today. Jeremy Hunt, already Chancellor, but of course staying put. You combine that with David Cameron, it feels like we're going back to the Cameroon government. And I think for Rishi Sunak, it's potentially an admission of defeat because about a month ago, he stood up on stage at his party conference and said he was going to be the change candidate, going against 30 years of consensus, decisions that taken by David Cameron and George Osborne.
Like HS2.
And David Cameron wasn't happy with it. So it feels at the very least there's a change of strategy coming from Rishi Sunak and perhaps an admission that he doesn't think he can be the change candidate and he quite likes the past.
Matthew?
Yeah, as I just said, I think the Conservatives have presided over a really dismal experiment. They've completely failed to respond to what the post-Brexit environment was all about, and returning to David Cameron is a great symbol of that. This is a party that is completely lost, which I think many voters feel deserves to lose the next election. I completely disagree with what Andrew and the other speaker was saying.
I'm just a non-entity.
Look,
don't worry about me.
I sit in focus groups with voters every week.
All right.
Every week I sit in focus groups with voters. The Conservative Party is dangerously out of touch with the country.
But I mean, that's what I kind of find.
Not just the economy, on not just the NHS, but on immigration, on security, on crime and borders.
All right.
No, I think Matthew's a very, very impressive media operator, but I do think that there does seem to be a bit of self-reflection when you're claiming that you're in touch with reality because you sit in focus groups with voters every week. I mean, that's what political parties do. They're always being accused of being out of touch. What about being an MP who talks to their voters every day?
Let's just focus, though,
That's not representative data, Ed.
Oh, I see. OK, so next time you knock on a door and ask a voter their opinion, you say, you're not representative data, I'm not going to listen to your views.
Let's revisit this at the general election. Let's revisit it the day after the general election.
Let me just go back to the substance, because the substance now, when it comes to policing protests, Rishi Sunak seems to be doing exactly what Suella Braverman, to some extent, was calling for, which is tougher policing of protests.
That's right.
So people might ask, well, why has he got rid of her then?
Well, I mean, as I say, I think the issue with Suella Braverman was a kind of drinking in the last chance saloon moment, because you had the comments about homelessness, which gave the Prime Minister a headache he didn't need. Again, regardless of whether you agree with her or not, I didn't agree with her, but it gave him a massive headache. And then you get this article, which may have made some valid points, but was deliberately written to provoke.
All right, Matthew Goodwin, thank you very much for joining us. Let's just show you a couple of the front pages following the protests at the weekend. We can show you some pictures both of the pro-Palestinian protest in central London and also the counter-protest by right-wing demonstrators. But the first front page here, The Sun, protest crackdown, never again, as Kate Mark silenced new laws to protect remembrance. The Mirror see it very differently, and this was, of course, ahead of Suella Braverman going. Quit calls grow. Home Secretary at the Cenotaph, have you no shame? She has, of course, gone. Jonathan, did you want the protest to go ahead on Armistice Day, the pro-Palestinian one?
Well, we always said that the protest should have gone ahead in a peaceful way, that the police should have been given the support, all the support that they needed, that we were very critical of the way in which Suella Braverman, we think, stoked tensions, very critical of the way in which the far right were able to advance on the cenotaph and the violence that broke out, and very critical that the police were not supported, and the messages that came out after the protest didn't even thank the police and acknowledge the pressure that the police were under.
Right, but do you support then the Prime Minister's call to strengthen protest laws in order to either not have these sorts of marches, ban them in future or not?
Well, we don't know exactly and specifically what he is proposing, but the general point of clearly that the pictures which I presume you're about to show on your screen, which I can just see
well,
here,
we can show one of them here.
Disgusting and anti-Semitic and outrageous. And I would urge anybody who knows who these people are to come forward and report them to the police. I know the Met have put out messages saying, who are these people?
They have.
That is illegal. It should not be allowed. These people need to be pursued.
Right, but did you think the march should go ahead? That was one of the placards, and whoever was holding that placard is being sought by the police. No British politician should be a friend of Israel. Obviously anti-Semitic, and the police will pursue them. But still, these marches go ahead, and many people feel there are extremist elements, even if they are very small, amongst them.
Well, look, I think people should be entitled to march in favour of Palestine if that is their view. I happen to be very pro-Israel and support Israel in the action it's taking at the moment. But there's no doubt it's cover for anti-Semitism and hate. I didn't want the marches to go ahead this particular weekend because it was Armistice weekend. But if they were going to go ahead next weekend, then of course they should be allowed, but they should be policed and they should be peaceful.
Let's just break in and show you Downing Street, because we have seen Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, walk up towards number 10. Now, usually with reshuffles, but this hasn't been a usual day, the people walking up to number 10 are usually in line for a promotion or at least a different job. They're not usually the cabinet ministers that are about to be sacked.
Right,
but
you're fired in the House of Commons and promoted in 10 Downing Street.
Well, thank you so much. That is the tradition. But here is Steve Barclay. I'm not saying that he was in line to be sacked necessarily. Just gone into number 10 to see the Prime Minister. We also had Therese Coffey, the Environment Secretary. Now, there had been some discussion about her losing her job, but she too walked up Downing Street to number 10. What's going on?
Yeah, I think there's been lots of speculation about the future of Therese Coffey, and I mean, we're not quite sure why she went to the front door. Was it a miscommunication?
Well, we're hearing Therese Coffey has gone, is what I've just been told here. Let's see exactly what has happened. But it is unusual, then, to go into number 10 so publicly in that way. Yeah, I think the suggestion I've heard, which isn't completely confirmed, is perhaps there was a miscommunication about where people should be going. Because, as you say, I don't think it's
Therese
the
Coffey
smartest
went in
move
to Downing Street on the basis that you couldn't then sack her. It's like
Perhaps
seeking sanctuary in a church.
It could have been a master strategy. But effectively, I mean, I think the fact that Therese Coffey was seen going in and you didn't really get white smoke for over an hour suggests that, you know, some difficult conversations were potentially going ahead. Now, Therese Coffey is someone who has been long tipped as a minister who could be pushed aside to make way. I think when you look at the environment brief, rivers and sewage, it's an area where I think the Tories think they are quite vulnerable, particularly in some of these blue wall seats to the Lib Dems. And it'd be interesting to see who they then decide is quite a role. I think they want that person quite out on the media around in that place. Right, well, let's have a look at this tweet, and there's been a reaction, actually, to this from Kemi Badenoch, the Business Secretary. I've been asked, says Rachel McLean, to step down from my role as Housing Minister. Disappointed, and was looking forward to introducing the Renters Reform Bill to committee tomorrow, and later the Leasehold and Freehold Bill. It's been a privilege to hold the position, and I wish my successor well. Now, there has been a slew of people quitting their jobs at the sort of more junior ministerial role. What does that signify?
Well, in some regards, it's just people who want to try to hold on to their seats and are not sure they're going to, and want to get back into the constituency and work harder so they remain MPs. But I think we're seeing is clearly going to be a more consequential reshuffle than we thought maybe an hour ago. And I think if Steve Barclay is being sacked, that's a very, very interesting and rather puzzling development in many ways, because his position on the NHS was really close to Rishi Sunak's position. Is this an admission that the promise on waiting lists isn't going to be held? The department has already lost one minister, Neil O'Brien, today. They can't lose too many ministers from a single department without, you know, sending it into tailspin and chaos.
Right. Well, I mean, we're going to wait and see if there are going to be any more announcements, because it does seem that the sort of first part, the very significant, dramatic part with David Cameron being brought in as Foreign Secretary after James Cleverly was moved to the Home Office to replace Suella Braverman, who was sacked. And now we might get more meat as to what is happening lower down and in other cabinet roles. It does feel like an election might be coming round maybe a bit sooner than perhaps people had thought. Not next October, but maybe May, Ed Vaizey.
Well, I always thought it would be May, but I've
Did you?
Firmly come around to the view it's going to be next October. And I think David Cameron, I mean, would probably want to at least have a year as Foreign Secretary before the election, but who knows? I mean, he doesn't decide the election. The Prime Minister does, but it doesn't feel like you would have a reshuffle of this extent if you weren't going for a long-haul year kind of reboot, try and overhaul Labour if you can. It doesn't feel like we're heading to a spring election, but I mean, it's all anybody's game.
Would you prefer a spring election?
I mean, we want an election as soon as possible. I mean, the country needs change. The country wants an election. And that is why the sort of Rishi Sunak trying to suggest that he can encapsulate change is so ludicrous when he's brought back David Cameron. And we've not had a chance to get into this, but David Cameron's got this whole lobbying scandal hanging over him about Lex Greensill.
There's still time.
Where he tried to exploit low-paid NHS and social care staff by giving them sort of payday loans and allowing the sort of loan book for these loans to be sold off. And he was using his contacts in government to try and get this scheme up and running. It was absolutely outrageous lobbying scandal hanging over him, and he's just been brought back. And this is Rishi Sunak, who promised us integrity and all that and tried to say he was different from Boris
Well, how does
Johnson.
that stand? I mean, it's taken you a little bit of time to come up with the Greensill, but that is all true.
I think we do need to talk a little bit more about the David Cameron appointment here, because there are big pros and big cons. The Greensill saga is certainly part of the con. He is going to be attacked, of course, over austerity and the Brexit referendum and all of that. And lots of people in the country will say, hold on a second, he's from the past, he's not been elected. On the other hand, I think he's in the UK, he is probably one of the best connected people when it comes to international relationships. You can see him standing alongside members of Biden's administration and being taken seriously.
Well,
the Chinese know him. He's really well known across the Middle East, where he has taken quite a hard line on Gaza in the past. He's described it as an open-air prison camp in the past. So his involvement in the Middle East, his involvement in our relations with the EU, he is a really big player and will be considered that way. And that is a big plus for the country.
Well, let's stick with that. But first of all, we've just seen Richard Holden. In fact, the door has just closed behind him. Transport Minister going into number 10 too. Well, let's see what's going to happen with that. But let's focus back on David Cameron, because presumably, I mean, he is and was a global leader. He will be known on the global stage. We are in the middle of this conflict in Israel and Gaza. That will bring something to the table for Rishi Sunak. But the Greensill lobbying scandal was a big deal during the time when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor.
Yes, and I think David Cameron will now come under pressure to answer more questions around it. I also think on foreign policy, yes, he has the experience, but I don't think the Cameron government was, without problems there. If you think about Libya, the regrets over that. So I think there are also questions there. And then I think the other potential con with the David Cameron appointment is, yes, there are some MPs who don't want ministerial jobs right now because they want to focus on trying to keep their seats, and we're seeing that. But there are also some MPs who do, and they probably think that they could be Foreign Secretary rather than having to ennoble someone to find a candidate. So I think there's lots of potential cons, even though he does bring a statesman's role, and you can see the argument. And I think Greensill is just one of the things that's just going to keep chipping away, because it's much harder to avoid questions when you have such a senior role in a great office of state than if you are effectively a retired Prime Minister, which allowed him to get away with some of this.
Let's catch up with what's been going on at number 10. We've seen a few people, notably walking up Downing Street. Henry Zeffman, the BBC's chief political correspondent, is still there. Henry, what can you tell us?
Two things. Steve Barclay, who's the Health Secretary, has walked up the street and gone into number 10. And then a few moments later, Richard Holden, who is a junior Transport Minister, elected for the first time at the 2019 general election, has also gone in. And I think that might reflect the long-standing desire among some people around Rishi Sunak to project a fresh image for the Conservative Party, get people around the cabinet table who haven't, like David Cameron, been there back since the Conservatives took over from the Labour Party in 2010. So that will be a big promotion, though we don't know yet to what job.
Right. I mean, when you talk about the fresh image, yes, as you say, that slight contrast to David Cameron being appointed as Foreign Secretary, it does sound like this is going to be a broader, deeper reshuffle than perhaps it looked first thing this morning.
I think what is becoming clear piece by piece is that this is the wide-ranging pre-election reshuffle that Conservative MPs have been desperate for Rishi Sunak to carry out for months. He is now getting a new team in place who will be carrying the Conservative Party's message for the coming months, right up until that general election, whenever it is. They will be the people who Rishi Sunak is presenting to the country and saying, this is what you would get if you gave the Conservative Party a 5th term in office. But there is that delicate balance, isn't there, between continuity, because you've now got at the top of government David Cameron, Jeremy Hunt, Michael Gove, all of whom were sitting around that cabinet table back in 2010, after the 2010 election, after Gordon Brown left office. You've got them on the one hand,
yes,
and I think what we're now seeing is the other bit of that seesaw. Fresher MPs, Richard Holden, and I'd expect others from the 2019 intake to follow, joining the cabinet table, continuity and change.
Henry Zeffman, thank you very much. When people watching this programme and looking at the news in general see David Cameron coming back and Rishi Sunak having talked about change, is any of this going to change anything significantly in terms of the prospects for the Conservatives at the next election? Still 20 points behind. This isn't going to move the dial, is it?
Well, you can say that about any reshuffle, and we in the Westminster Village love a reshuffle. It's something we can chat about for days and days and days. But of course, it changes very little, except to say that appointing somebody as significant as David Cameron allows you to, as I said earlier, to send that signal.
Yeah, except
to the
as
centrist
Andrew was saying, for a
voter.
lot of people, the first thing they will think of when they see David Cameron, actually there'll be a couple of things. Austerity might be one, and the Brexit EU referendum the other, on whichever side you were on.
You're totally right. And our political leaders are not omniscient. They don't know something we don't. And this may well very badly backfire on Rishi Sunak.
Well, look, in the end, I agree with Ed that us politicians and journalists, we obsess about reshuffles. But in the final analysis, people at home, working people, are paying more in tax. They're paying more on their mortgage. They're struggling to see a GP. They're waiting longer for NHS treatment. That is what the country wants change on. Right. And this isn't going to change any of that.
Let's just focus a little bit on Labour, because on Wednesday there could be a vote calling for a ceasefire, an amendment to the King's Speech debate. Comes from the SNP. We think that's what's going to happen. What are Labour going to do? 68 or so MPs, many of them, or some of them, front benchers, have said they don't agree with the Labour leadership's call for a humanitarian pause. They want to see a ceasefire. Will it be a free vote?
Well, first of all, we don't know if there's going to be a vote.
All right.
Because the Speaker has to select the amendment, and we don't know if that is going to happen.
No.
So that's
but if it does
that's
happen,
the first thing. So I'm not going to second guess the whipping
Jonathan,
arrangements. Well, you'll have to get the Chief Whip on if you want to ask about whipping arrangements.
All right.
But the position of the Labour Party, as has been set out by David Lammy and Keir Starmer, is that, of course, we want to see an end to violence. Of course, we want to see a cessation of fighting, but it's why that they've called for a full and immediate humanitarian pause.
All right, and if members of the front bench defy the leadership in this vote and say there has to be a ceasefire, should they be sacked? Well, I'm not asking what will happen.
No,
in your mind, should they be sacked?
You're asking me to engage.
Oh, Jonathan.
In a hypothetical. We're not on Wednesday yet. We don't even know if there's going to be a vote on Wednesday yet.
Yeah. Isn't it annoying when they don't answer questions that they know, politicians?
I feel for you, Joe. I feel for you. I've been sitting there as well in these similar circumstances, but I know the last time I checked, there is a really live discussion going on inside Keir Starmer's office about how to whip this. And if the vote comes, it's a really, really hard choice for them because his authority is on the line. Here is somebody who said this is the line, and he cannot afford, I think, many front benchers to depart from it. I think he will probably allow plenty of backbenchers to vote as their conscience demands because there are too many of them to stop them all. He can't fire everybody, but I would imagine he is seeing front benchers one by one saying, please, please, if you want a big job in a Keir Starmer government, sit on your hands this week.
Jonathan?
And it's a really tough choice because even Red Wall Tories are facing this dilemma as well.
Jonathan?
Well, I'm not aware of these discussions, but I'm not in the Whip's office, so... Right. I mean, we don't know if there's going to be a vote, right? I mean, by Wednesday...
Are you sitting there like this with your fingers crossed?
By Wednesday, we'll know if there's a vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that front benchers, as we understand, have been advised that they shouldn't be signing any more early day motions points to the fact that Keir is trying to have a bit more discipline, and therefore will he risk losing a handful of front benchers to maintain that? It might be the better move for him than having a situation whereby he looks as though he cannot really hold collective responsibility, because I think you would expect a government government and waiting to be able to do that.
Right, we haven't got long left. Let's just show you this tweet from the departing Therese Coffey, Environment Secretary. I've written to the Prime Minister today to step down from government. It's been a privilege to serve him and indeed 5 Conservative Prime Ministers as a minister. I look forward to continuing to serve my constituents. On a day that the former Prime Minister David Cameron has returned to frontline politics as Foreign Secretary and Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has been sacked. The reshuffle continues. But that's all from us here on Politics Live, and I will be back tomorrow with more. Bye-bye.
Oh my fucking lord. You can't make this shit up, can you? Honestly. You literally can't make it up. My fucking mind. I said this the other day. It's all gone to shit for the Tories. What are they gonna do? Honestly. Bright idea. David Cameron. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Just have an election already. I don't see the point anymore. I mean, fucking calling it a zombie government is insulting to a zombie. I quite like zombies. Well, zombie movies. So I don't even want to insult brain dead brain munchers at this fucking point. They seem like they know what they're doing. I know it's a very simple thing that they do, eat brains. But at least you do it, right? What the fuck does this government actually do? Other than fuck everything up. Fuck my life. Suella Braverman. Why did she even get a job in the first place? Fuck knows. Oh yeah, we do know. To put fucking Rishi in his fucking place. When he was appointed Prime Minister, nobody elected that fucking moron. Just so you know. He's got very small pants. And nobody elected Mr. Small Pants. I seen a great meme of Suella Braverman holding his hand as a school child. One of the best things I've ever seen. Quite funny. And she, the crackhead that she is going to go full on fucking Liz Truss mode. It's going to be a cat fight. Oh my god, it's going to get weird, innit? It's going to be a fight between Kemi Badenoch, who's the silent assassin. Just saying, keep your eyes on that motherfucker. She's ruthless as well. Don't be that. Don't be misunderstood about her. She's more ruthless than Liz Truss and Suella Braverman, because she's actually got brains. That's the scary part. She's actually got brains. That's why she creeps me out more than these other two fucking dickheads. Anyway, we're gonna get Kemi Badenoch, fucking dumbass Liz Truss, you can't count. We got beat by letters. And then you got Suella Braverman. All vying to be the new leader of the Tory party. And you know what they're called? The New Conservatives. How fucking mental is that? New Conservatives. Might just come as fucking the alt-right Conservatives. Give fucking Tommy Robinson a fucking job on Nigel Farage. It's batshit crazy. Have an election. Let's get rid of these mad fuckers already. Just change it so we can just have a laugh at the fucking Labour Party for once. Labour Party's so boring, honestly. There's nothing to talk about. Sorry, some nutters. Anyway, back tomorrow. Hope you all have a lovely day. Try not to get arrested for anti-Semitism. Just saying, behave. Be nice to each other.